Coaching Network webinar. My name is Vicky and I'm the founder of the FCN. Before we begin and I introduce our presenter, can I ask you all just to type yes into the chat box if you can hear me properly? Okay, thank you everybody. So first of all, I'd like to say a big thank you to you all for joining us on this webinar, delivered in partnership with the Johan Cruyff Institute in Amsterdam. We have coaches joining us from right around the world, including Europe and the UK, the USA, Canada, New Zealand, Africa, and the Caribbean. So I wanted to say a good morning, good afternoon, and a good evening to you wherever you may be in the world. Can I also ask that you can double check you have a very good internet connection, because that can affect the quality of your viewing of the webinar. If you do have trouble or lose signal during the webinar, you can log back in using the same link that you were sent. And lastly, please make sure that you have your microphone switched off, as it can cause a few issues with the sound quality for everybody else. Okay, so let's begin by introducing our presenter, Henk. Henk has been connected to the Johan Cruyff Institute for many years, originally as a professor of strategic management and coach, and recently as manager and academic director. His roots lie in top sports and classical Japanese martial arts, in addition to the completed studies in strategy and human movement science that he followed in Japan. He also has a number of high management positions in international sport, but he started as an athlete, followed by international positions as a coach. I would like to say a personal thank you to Henk and also Lisette of the Johan Cruyff Institute for putting on this webinar for us all, and for their support of the Female Coaching Network of the last few weeks. So without further ado, I will pass you over to Henk for our webinar called Performance Under Pressure.
Well, thank you so much, Vicky, for this lovely introduction. I must admit that every morning when I stand up, I only see Henk. But then again, today I have the privilege to share my knowledge about performance under pressure with all of you, dear guests. And without further ado, let's start. Now, you know, the question, how does performance under pressure actually feels, is some that I'm going to ask you. So may I invite you to work with me for a second, or maybe a little bit more. Now, please look around your room and just see all the details of your room. Just look around, and what do you actually see? Do you see a table? Do you see a television set? Do you see a computer, etc., etc.? Yeah? Are you fine? Now close your eyes. And please do, just listen to my voice. I want you to stand up. And I want you to decide to run as fast around your room as possible while still keeping your eyes closed. But wait until I say start. Are you ready? Do you still remember your room? Is there breakable stuff inside of your room? Doesn't really matter. You have to run really fast. But wait until I say yes. Are you ready? Stop. Open your eyes and please sit down. You know, I wonder if whilst you were doing that, you felt some pressure. Are there breakable stuff inside of your room? Were you really willing to run as fast as you can through your room whilst holding your eyes closed? Well, if you did, and if you have experienced that and waited for my comment to start, you have felt the first, let's say, flinches of performing under pressure. Because before we're going to talk about how to actually help your athletes to perform under pressure, we first have to focus on you. Because there is this very simple law, and the law says that there are mirror neurons. You know, if you yawn, everybody around you tends to yawn more or less. And very often in sport, we overlook the position of the coaches, and we tend to have only instruments how to help our athletes. And that's not where we're going to start. We're going to start just thinking about what you actually experience whilst you perform under pressure. Now imagine yourself, for instance, that you're a coach that has lost quite a few matches, and the next match is going to be break or stay, where your executive board has told you that if you do one more match, they will throw you out. How do you react then when you have a, let's say, group of athletes that you have to coach? Are you going to do it differently? Are you going to radiate your tension, or you're just going to simply stay calm and collected and cool? Well, this is something that we have to investigate, right? Now, the first thing that actually makes your pressure goes up is the qualification of the unknown. You know, strangely enough, it is a, let's say, reaction that already dates back to the Neanderthals, because what you don't know, you estimate large and negative. Yes, of course, there are people who you react on this and say it's a positive thing, or a challenge, so to say, but most of us, what we don't know, we estimate as large and negative. And that's actually most interesting, because very often, if we deduct what we actually do know, there might be no reason at all to estimate what we don't know as large and negative. Have you ever had the experience when you were in another country where you have prepared so well and that you take a lot of stuff in your suitcase and think about the fact that you may be doing a trip in a, let's say, a forest, an unknown territory? Well, the next time when you go to the same country, you will just take a short and the flip-flops. Now, that's what we call estimating the unknown as big and negative. And it's in fact the same thing that happens with your athletes. And it's the same thing that happens with you when you close your eyes, standing in a room and being forced to dash around whilst you're not quite sure whether you'll be successful. You estimate that it is much greater and much more negative than possibly is the case. Maybe you already have underestimated yourself. So how did you qualificate the unknown? Have you given it some thoughts? Just simmer on that for a moment, because it needs a little bit of time to clearly see how you actually respond. It's the same way that you respond. Once an athlete asked me, "Coach, can you help me and show me how I need to react the best way on an international match somewhere in a foreign country?" Maybe the simplest answer is, you need to do it. To get there, there is a route. And for this, we have to take some steps. The first step that we have to take is to consider the following question. What is yours to influence, and what's not yours? What could you have done today, closing your eyes, dashing through your room? What could you have done? Were you afraid of, let's say, running through your window, breaking some very expensive things, or were you just simply confident enough that you could do that, slowly and gradually? What could you really do? How much was already in your power? You know, the interesting thing is that very often we estimate that as something that is not so much in our power, and we see ourselves incapacitated, and therefore more or less we're paralyzed, and we can't really do what we need to do. I see that very often. You know, we always look at the athletes, but how often do we actually look at ourselves? Does the situation that you're in differ so much from other situations? You know, also a very essential question just to lead into performance under pressure. Is there really such a big difference in doing a match on a pitch when it is all about the finals or the World Championships compared to what you do in a regional match? Or are there many more things in common? Is it not only a pitch and opponents, or is it really so much more? How much does it really differ? What do you think? Do you think that it differs a lot? Do you think that it differs a lot from the game? Is it the different rules in the game? Is the pitch differently? Is the opponent acting differently? How much does it really differ? Because before you know it, you estimate all those things that you don't know, large and negative. Please respond on the chat if you agree or not agree, because I really like to know what you think about this. Do you estimate it the same? How much do you actually have under control? Do you as a coach react the same under all circumstances? Can you perform under pressure yourself? Have you ever checked that? Have you had a training? Do you do this on a competent, conscious level? Do you not qualify the unknown as large and negative and take a lot of measurements to make sure that you are well prepared and well guarded and maybe overkill in what you do? Doesn't really take a lot of, let's say, experience before you're actually going to trim that down to just the flip-flops and the shorts. So qualification of the unknown is one of the things that makes pressure go up. We can, dance around the tree, but we still have to admit that to a certain extent we're all human beings, and we as coaches do that. That's why I find it so important, we here at the Institute, that we focus on the coach first before we actually focus on the athletes. Have you ever heard about the layered cake? Now, the layered cake is this. Imagine you have done shopping in Christmas and you're walking in one of those stores really crowded, and somebody bumps into you whilst you're actually carrying 2 or 3 bags, and that person didn't look, bumps into you. What an unnice person to do that, right? Now let's compare that with when you walk on the beach with your beloved ones, your family and your beloved ones, at one of those nice summer holidays, and somebody bumps into you. What's actually the difference? The difference is the layered cake, the experience that you've had during that day or through that period. So that is also something that influences you as a coach. And we as coaches always focus only on the athletes. But can we convey trustworthy messages and can we show trustworthy behavior when we're not really sure whether we are conscious and competent enough to deal with our own emotions? So this is our first step. Qualification of the unknown. The question helps you to see for what it's really true. What is really needed to prepare. How much you really have to have tension. What is yours really tells where can you have certain kind of controls. Or do you feel that everything is controlled by the environment and you're just a simple subject? Simply asking the question gives you some insights in what is yours. And that will help you to limit stress to things that might need a little bit more attention or professional attention, so to say. Does it really differ that much if you do a match on the Olympic Games with a normal match in the national competition? Where is the difference? Isn't it just if you trim it down and slim it down and peel the onion of all the layers, is it not more than just simply being there at the pitch and doing your best against a capable and competent opponent? All the other things like press and opinions are actually things that are not yours to a certain extent. What's yours is the performance on the pitch. What's yours is a pitch that you already know, and you know the circumstances, you know the materials, you know the rules. So does it really differ that much? Now, if we talk about you as a coach, there's also another point where we have to put some attention to. Have you ever watched those let's say matches where you see that the coach is just showing his passion, trying to give instructions, but have you ever, let's say, looked away from the coach and looked at the behavior on the bench? How does your assistant coach, your physiotherapist, your doctor and your team manager actually react? Have you ever given that attention? Now this is something that I would wholeheartedly advise you to do. Because before you know it, you are cool, competent, very aware of your own behavior, but as soon as there is a loss, behind points, a non-performance in the first round of a qualification tournament, where those of your staff are actually going to buckle down, sigh, show their frustrations, showing that they are appalled by the performance, being, let's say, excited by the win. And do you know what the effect of your staff is on your athletes? Have you taken that into account? Now, I assume that you do, but just to make this, I'm a bit meticulous in this process. So just to make sure that you are aware of this, please consider that if you coach your athletes to perform under pressure, don't omit your staff. Look at your staff and see how they perform. Because very often, their non-verbal or verbal behavior will influence the performances of the athletes. Sometimes you are very competent in hiding your own thoughts and emotions and only be purely functional as a coach. But then your staff shows the discussions that you had about the team and your athletes whilst they are on the bank and your athletes are performing. So at least one thing I would like to invite you to is this: look at matches, don't look at the coach, look at how the people behave at the bench. People who are there as your staff, and also those athletes who are reserves. Because very, very often the coach is competent enough, but then the other ones who are also there to support show a different behavior. If you've been an athlete, do you still remember how demotivating it is when you see that your coach is stressful, or when your coach is okay, but the rest of the staff is stressful? And not to say another thing too, because, you know, the more you look at it, the more you understand that, you know, if you do everything on a conscious and competent level, you can be the best, let's say, staff, providing the best help for the athletes. So before talking about the athletes, this is all about you. Now, you know, again, how does your staff, your assistant coach, for instance, actually qualificates the unknown? Does he really understand where his responsibilities lies, or she? Do they really understand that a match doesn't differ so much as long as you purely look at, say, the game? Now, I have made one of my pictures here a little bit blurred, but I just want to show you that the only thing that I actually did was my very competent assistant coaches was very passionate about his athletes, but also very worried. So the only thing that I did was make him laugh and have a tension relief, and then focus again on the. It's just let's say a simple play to do this. Surely we're going to talk about how to do that, but first and foremost, you know, these are the first steps. By the way, do you still remember how you feel when you were, let's say, standing on the point of running through the room? Were you willing to do that? Were you willing to run really, really fast? What withheld you to do that? Did you feel under control? You know, the funny thing is that both your staff and both the athletes will pretty much feel the same, that they have no control, that they didn't have taken everything into account. You know, there's a scientific saying for that. It's called incapacitated by the unknown. You gain the competences during training, you gain the competences during your national preparations, during your national competition, and maybe you even visualize what you do, but still, somewhere along the line, small, let's say, monster, or would I say natural reflex will just creep in and incapacitate you by the unknown, because it smells different, it looks different, and maybe, for instance, the dressing rooms are different. Maybe you were in the hotel and you are faced with the fact that the logistics are different. You are promised that the bus will pick you up at, let's say, 9 o'clock, but they'll pick you up at 9:20. So much of these, let's say, changes that you endure during matches, internationally or nationally, also influences you in getting back into this, let's say, inevitable circle where you think, I'm not quite sure, will I make it to the match? what will happen, and you will qualify that as large or negative. So the first thing that you have to, let's say, pay attention to is qualify things in the right way. Now, if we leave the path of thinking about, let's say, things that generate pressure, let's talk a little bit about what actually you could do in circumstances of pressure, because we need to know that. But may I invite you just to do that and apply that on yourself before thinking about applying it on your athletes. An angry coach can't really coach somebody who needs to be calm. A coach that fears for his own position, or doubts at his own competences, or doubts at the team and shows that, can't really coach confidence into a team. That's at least something that we know. And very, very often, at least one thing is sure, you might hide it, but people can sense it and can see it. So the first thing really what you have to do is work on your own balance. Okay. This is not tricks and tools, but that's at least a way of thinking and having some essential insights and how to actually use principles to put yourself first and foremost in balance, under pressure, and then apply the same to your athletes. Because there's also this, let's say, essential knowledge that we all have. If you truly understand what's the insides, then you can be a better coach. It's like the same if we talk about the sea. We can talk about the sea, we can watch videos, we can read books about the sea, but it's essential that you jump in the sea, taste the salty water, feel, let's say, the content of that sea, find the sand between your teeth and between your toes, and then add that to all the scientific knowledge and aggregated, let's say, experience that you have over years, and put that all together. So again, if you would close your eyes and run to your room, one of the things that would definitely have helped you is set your own goals. Make sure that from having no control, getting into control. Because performance under pressure is about feeling no control. Set your goals. How do you want to behave? What do you want to reach? But make things that are tangible for you. Can you say to yourself that you can run with your closed eyes in a moderate fashion to a room that you know quite well, because you live there? Can you say to yourself that even if you bump into, let's say, the corner of the table, that you can recuperate and run around the table, let's say, in the same fashion? Can you be fearless enough to say that if you touch, let's say, some of your fine china that almost falls off the table, that you can still grab it? Set yourself goals in which you can say, it's tangible for me, this is something that I can realize. As a coach, say to yourself that if it comes to, let's say, those things that will disrupt your fine preparations, like buses that are too late, logistics that don't function, athletes that don't perform well, that it is information. Set yourself the goal that you would say to yourself, okay, this is information, I'm going to digest the information, and I have the competences to react and respond on it properly. Set yourself the goal in how you are going to behave under pressure. Say that you are going to stay calm. Say that you are not going to be aggravated, even if you are faced with people who are really doing things of which you have a certain kind of negative qualification. Set yourself the goal in how you behave towards an athlete that doesn't function well, despite the fact that you have trained with those athletes for a longer period of time, giving a lot of effort to have them perform on a certain level. Set yourself the goal of behaving calm, detached, with a little emotion, and with a lot of passion and dedication to give them the right coaching, not what you like to do, but what your athlete actually needs. Can you do that? Sit down for a second and ask yourself that. Can you set goals? You know, I can assure you one thing. If you have not done this before, don't worry. Everything needs a start. Start to do it. Look at it and don't evaluate it straight away as it has to become perfect in a week, because that's not going to happen. If you have to do this, you have to be patient with yourself. There's a natural growth path. You will make mistakes. You will feel that you have set yourself goals and maybe you don't reach these goals instantly. But there is one, let's say, I would say, strong force. The things that you give attention will grow. So if you give attention to the fact that you have to set goals, I can assure you that that will most surely help you to, let's say, reach those goals, not within the first time, but maybe the second time. The second part of these essential insights is tension regulation. Tension regulation is a very simple principle, in fact. Tension regulation says, be aware of what rises your tension. Awareness. So this is not about, let's say, how to deal with it and bring it down, your tension, but more about awareness of tension. Because very often we're not aware. Haven't you had the experience where somebody else said, hey, you're tense, and where you say, I don't feel tense at all. I'm feeling pretty okay. I'm really happy with what's going to happen. Awareness is here, is let's say the key word here. As soon as you are aware of tension, something interesting will happen. Despite the fact that you won't feel it, your tension will drop. Not much, but your tension will drop. Because you give attention to tension. That's a strange sentence in English, isn't it? But it's true. Tension regulation starts just simply by the fact that you are going to give attention to tension. But to regulate it, we need to do a little bit more. And that's also in this list, but I will talk about it a little bit later if you just allow me to do that. First of all, tension regulation is something that you can handle if you are going to do and combine two things together. One is setting goals, and the other one is visualization. Now, I know there is written a lot about visualization, and I think surely that you can find the right way to do it. But simply enough, I would say just sit down and imagine how you would act under a certain circumstances. So combine the goals that you have set and now visualize that you really are going to do it. Imagine a situation. Take a situation from your memory, from the history of you as a coach, and think about that situation and imagine that you're going to do it in another way, where you have no tension, where you didn't lose your temper, where you actually are calm, overseeing the situation and understanding what your athlete needs. Because as soon as you don't perform under pressure well, you don't have any control. If you perform under pressure well, you will see so many possibilities within your own range of capabilities to really tap into that and find a proper solution, a proper way to coach your athletes. Or even surprisingly, you might even coach your athlete the same way that you do in the training, whilst in fact that person is performing, let's say, on the highest platform and aiming for a title. I know that by now you understand that I'm simply talking about, does the situation really differ so much from the training? So set yourself a goal, understand that you need to do tension regulation by the awareness that you have tension, and then visualize how you are going to react in a certain case. Do something that is tangible for you. If it's intangible for you to just have a breather, wait half a minute before you react, look around, look where you are, ask yourself, is this a positive or a negative situation? Then you are already there. I think there is one big secret in all of this. The secret is this one. You are allowed to be there. Nobody else. Same goes for your athlete. You have worked hard. You have found your way. You found your destination. You have found a place where you can use your talents. It's a privilege and a joy. And the same goes for your athletes. Very often if I ask athletes, how do you feel? They say, I don't want to lose. Very often if you ask athletes afterwards, did you really enjoy your career? Most of the times we here at the Institute get answers that varies between yes, a part, partially, but never a wholeheartedly yes. It was one journey of joy all those decades that I did sport in general. If you ask coaches, the first thing that they will say, all the stakeholders, top sport management, lack of money, etc., etc. But I'll never hear the thing that they say, this was a privilege. It's the best thing that I ever did. It's so much joy to hold those responsibilities. It's so much joy to help those athletes to do that. Set yourself a goal, but at least combine two things. It's a privilege to do what you do. You deserve to be there. Isn't it great to do it? I mean, really. It's wonderful, right? We love our jobs. We want to be coaches. We want to do this. We want to be meaningful for our athletes. And why can we do this? Because we can endure all the circumstances. Set yourself goals. Try to understand that it's not hard, the glass is not half full, it's double full, because you are allowed to do that. Set yourself the goals to behave like that. Visualize how you're going to just simply think that way, and that will help you to release your tension. It most certainly will. But it needs a certain kind of mind control. Because, the tendency of looking at the negative sides and the negative aspects of what you're doing are, let's say, it's a human principle. We all do that. You can't deny it. It happens. It's okay. But you, on the other hand, have the chances and the prerogative to work with it and try to change it. That's pretty much where you can just watch these steps and, instead of living in oblivion, if I might say so, please allow me to say this, but be competent on a conscious level and see that also you as a coach are also being affected by pressure. It's nothing strange. Well, then you have to make steps. Set goals. See that you have tension. Work on your visualization, how you're going to perform, but make it tangible. So the first thing that you do is maybe don't lose your temper. Maybe experience a little bit more joy. Looking around at your athletes, looking at the executive board or everybody who's in the stadium, the fans, the families of your athletes, and think, yes, this is where I want to be. And take that joy into the constellation. Mind control simply says that instead of just doing things without thinking about it, give it attention. That's mind control. So the addition of setting goals, tension regulation in where you're aware of tension, and training visualization where you look at yourself and think about how you're going to react, altogether is called mind control. And the more you do it, the more you will master it. But it will be a natural process. If you have never done it before, try to change your behavior the next time that you go to a training and see what kind of effect that actually has on your team. I mean, not you and your appearance, but maybe the tone of your voice, maybe your interruptions, maybe your non-verbal language. Just see what happens with your team. See what happens with yourself when you are in a game, and check your own, let's say, status quo, let's say halfway through the game. How do you feel? What do you think? Can you change that? Is the behavior that you have fit for the occasion? I know that you can, because it's in the human capacity to do so. You know, even if I take an example like driving a car, you know, if you start to drive a car and somebody cuts you off whilst you drive 120 kilometers an hour, I think you will inhale really strongly and exhale really strongly, and then you're going to drive 60 on the highway because it's your first experience. If it happens for the 10th time in a year, or even when you're driving for many years, you just see it, you take it as information, and I think that you will perform steadily and correctly as you've done before, and only see it and just pursue your way. This is pretty much the same. Disruptions in what happens is information. And if all of this is, let's say, something which is much harder for you to work with, then let's move on to something called RED. RED, retro-emotive technique, is actually, I don't want to just wrap it up and say this is an essence, but there is an essence in RED, and the essence is, what's the worst thing that could happen to you? Now, in many cases, that the athlete would say, I will lose my world title, or I will lose my title, I will lose my qualification, you will not place me in the team, etc., etc., etc. But let's use the RED for you as a coach. What would happen if you are in the middle of a game and you feel that you cannot really reach out to your athlete who is not performing well, or your athletes, your team who's not performing well? What happens to you? Do you feel pressure? Surely. Now, if I'm just going to compare that with, when does your brain function the best? In fact, when it doesn't feel pressure, right? People who tell me that they are the most creative under pressure, I would like to put them in a, let's say, lovely resort where they can relax, because I know that their creative powers are unleashed. Because under pressure, you have a certain kind of, let's say, creational power, and you can, let's say, adapt to the situation. But if you're relaxed, there's more room for adaptation. You know, it's like a difference between, let's say, small room of thinking and a large room of thinking. Thank you, Sarah Wigan. I see that you write, I really struggle to make decisions under pressure. I worry too much about the risks. Now, you know, if I tag to that, dear Sarah, then I would honestly say, what's the worst thing that could happen to you? You make a wrong decision, right? Yeah, Peter Demboga said, what is the worst that can happen? Now, I invite you to think about that. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? You know, if you start with these thoughts up front, I would say it's harder to imagine this when you are in, let's say, the finals, or in an Olympic match when you are going to get gold or silver. I understand that. But let's just downsize this to the principle where you're still in your preparations and you start to really work on these principles in your preparations. Because same as with your athletes, this is not something that you should do for the first time when you are in a big match or something, or when there's a lot at stake. It's training. It's training, attention, and awareness. I know that there is a lot at risk or at stake, but there is a controversy here, or discrepancy. Sorry for my English. But the discrepancy is that if you want to find solutions, you have to have an open mind, because an open mind works the best. As soon as you are going to think about risks, your mind is going to close and limit it to, let's say, the basic knowledge that you have, and maybe some creative power, and maybe some divine intervention, so to say. So the first thing that I would do is downsize it and say, okay, what's the worst thing that could happen? Maybe you lose the match. But if you lose the match and you learn to dare and make, let's say, some opening for yourself, lean back and release a bit, you might find solutions that might not work straight away in the match that you have, but it certainly will give you some security that the next time that you do it, you are more open to do it. Do you understand what I'm meaning here, Sarah? It's just a matter of asking yourself, have you not estimated everything around it that paralyzes you to really and truly make a decision? Because you have not, let's say, the stress of making a decision. No. You have the privilege and the power to make the decision. You are there. You are allowed to do this. And you know what? You're also allowed to make mistakes. Because perfectionism is not a human principle. Please remember that. You're allowed to make mistakes. But if you look at your mistakes as information that will help you to recuperate, refresh, and reframe, then that will surely help you to move forward. So making mistakes, losing a match, giving the wrong coachings is information. Now, Sarah, I'm just going to read one of your lines here, and I'm going to share it with everybody else, if that's okay with you. Sometimes you say that you get paralyzed and you try to hide, but you know, as soon as you change this, and thank you, Luis Capicotto, if I pronounce your name correctly. You say threat versus challenge. I wouldn't even say that it is a challenge, but it is a privilege. It's an invitation. You are allowed to do that. And you know what? I'm quite sure that you can. Because as soon as you have taken your profession seriously, as soon as you are going to look at it from, let's say, the perspective of the privilege, you will most definitely see that there are much more opportunities for you to share. There's also one other element that I would like to touch here. I know that we have ample time to do all of this, but let me just share this one with you. Breathing can be an essential element in pressure control. People who breathe like this don't think like this. Look at your breathing and check whether you are breathing like you're running too fast, like you're choking, and force yourself to breathe more slowly. Even count at your breathing. Don't worry. Sometimes your hand's going to tremble. Sometimes you're going to tremble in all. But the first thing that you do is control your breathing. Slow your breathing and count it. And still enjoy the game. Look at how your athletes actually perform. I hope that helps a bit. You know, I would say that before juggling 9 balls, if you do all these steps, then I can assure you that you're more competent and more conscious about your own posture and also your own way of communicating, your own position towards your athletes. And that will help you to see the right way to coach your athletes. Now, there is one more topic that I would like to touch here, if you allow me, and that is this one. When? Very often, coaches ask us here at the Institute, when should I do this? Now, let me just give you one simple answer. When needed. 24/7. When being in contact with the athletes. When being at home. If it comes to the athletes, I would certainly say that working with performance under pressure is not only a thing that you should do whilst you actually are in a match. You should do that, let's say, on all occasions. That could simply be when you are you're picking your athletes up, going in the bus towards, let's say, a match in the plane, when it's in an international match, sitting there with your athletes in the airplane on the seats, when enjoying the food in the transit zone, when being in the hotel, 24/7. It's not always going to be instructions, but a calm demeanor of yourself as a coach, confident, seeing what the athletes need, will allow you to make not large gestures, but essential gestures that will help your athletes. Sometimes it's not an instruction, but simply a hand on the shoulder of one of your athletes. Sometimes it's say, please sit down, don't worry, I'm just going to do this. As soon as you are in balance, you as a person, same way as in yawning, people are going to copy your behavior, or at least they will feel a certain kind of reliable and consistent support, and that will help them in their performance. So maybe you have to breathe as soon as you check in and feel that it's really going to happen. You're going to go to the Olympic Games, you're going to go to an international event, you're going to go and maybe have a meeting with the executive board where they're going to decide to keep you on board as a coach for the next year. Because there is no, let's say, designated time and space where you have to do it. You have to do it, let's say, when needed. And that is in contact with the athlete 24/7. What does it ask from you? Much more awareness of your own composure. I know it's not you, but I very often see that athletes are fine and they are well prepared, and then there is an emotional release amongst the staff who are joining at a separate table in the breakfast. Have you ever seen that? Do you know what I mean? The athletes are fine, and the coaches and the staff are loud-mouthed, sharing their opinion about the day ahead and saying things like, today I'm not really sure whether the logistics are going to be fine, whether the bus is going to take us off, whether we will have a dressing room. And I'm really annoyed with the situation because it's the 10th time that I'm in an event where everything goes wrong. Do you understand how much it will help your athletes? Not at all. So when, I would say 24/7. Yes, said Rita, you're writing that keeping calm under pressure is really what is really hard. Yes, of course that is. But as soon as you start to do the steps of recognizing what pressure actually is causing and how you can diminish things like your estimations that what you don't know is large and negative, and the other steps, you are slowly working towards, let's say, the situation where you are competent enough to recognize your own behavior and immediately have an intervention. I see Sarah Wigan asking, do you get butterflies? Yeah, you can get butterflies. Surely you can. And there's no coach who doesn't have that in those lovely matches where you have put a lot of effort with your athletes and when there is something at stake. That's perfectly fine. But you have to evaluate it differently. You can feel it as something that is boring, or you can feel it as something that is okay. Yannick van der Putten, who I welcome as one of our alumni, says, but isn't it extremely boring if there was no pressure? Sure. But, as long as this is pressure which you can't control, where you don't understand how you actually are behaving, that is not boring, but that has a devastating result on your performance as a coach and therefore on the performance of your athletes. Pressure is pretty okay, but then you have to categorize and master it and know for sure that you act under it, useful for your athletes. That's actually what I mean. Luis Capicotto writes here, I have filmed a few coaching sessions to look back on my behavior, which has raised my awareness of my body language and so on. Well, that's a perfect advice, because very often you don't know how your voice actually sounds when you are under pressure. You don't know what your body language does. And maybe with the best intentions, and with the best passion, you still are directive and killing every opportunity to be relaxed, calm, and leaning back, which might be more useful for your athletes. So maybe the passion has to be translated into different actions than the obvious one in showing passion and being strong forward. Maybe passion is also your invitation to be calm and be trustworthy and be in balance. Surely it's hard to learn breathing if it's not something that you have done before. But the first step is hard. The second is not. The first one is just breathe. Count your breathing. Some thoughts will cross your mind like, is this really useful? I can't feel it. But stick with it for a while. And you will find out that it has an effect. It truly has. How can I consciously whilst in a state of deep focus? The other interesting thing is that a state of deep focus is something that we have to, let's say, reformulate more or less. Thank you, Sarah, for the question again. Deep focus is something where you could say that you're really concentrated on the game. Now, if you want to use your full concentration, your mind has to be really open. Then you see the most. The more you put yourself under pressure, the more narrow it's going to be. It feels like a more specific focus, like looking through a microscope, but in fact it's not. Would meditation help? That's what Sarah asks here in the chat. Yes, it does. But then again, there are quite a few different types of meditation, and I must say that you have to find out which type works for you. But the essence of meditation is something interesting. It actually says that you have a working brain, and your brain works 24/7 all life long. And meditation, to a certain extent, stops you for a second, or maybe for 100th of a second. And that gives your brain a lot of rest, like a good sleep, but then a little bit more intense, initiated on a conscious and competent level. So meditation surely helps. It helps you to look at yourself and also come to the conclusion that your behavior and the way that you have done these experiences and these steps are the same steps that you can ask from your athletes. But to give athletes this balance can only be done by one thing, and that is if you understand it. It's like the sea. If you want to talk about performance under pressure, if you want to talk about breathing control, you have to go in the sea, taste the sea, and then have some experience yourself before you can coach another person. Because paper knowledge is not enough here. That's also a privilege. You can investigate this and feel this. Let me have a small look at some of the questions that I see here in the chat. Hello Nishan, thank you for your question. You say, I do meditate, but the game or at work, I lose consciousness over my breathing. I would say, Nishan, that it is actually to a certain, it's a circle. Unconscious, maybe competent, but not on a conscious level, towards conscious on a competent level, and then somewhere along the line, you're just going to lose that again because it's internalized. Take it like driving a car. In the beginning of driving a car, it's a 10 to 2. You sit like this on the steering wheel, and you look in the mirror constantly, yeah? And somewhere along the line, you know exactly where the traffic is, but you don't do that on a conscious level. It's the same learning path. Attention, internalizing, and then when you internalize it, there's no intention because it's already in your DNA, so to say. Vicky, how are we doing in time? I love to talk to our dear guests for much longer than this.
Keep going as long as you want, Hank.
Okay, then I'm just going to do a little bit more because I love to answer the questions that I have here in the chat, if that's fine with you.
Absolutely.
Let me at least say that I'm grateful that I'm allowed to share some of the knowledge of our institute with our dear guests, and I have a lot of appreciation for your organization. It's a privilege to do this. Joyce, just give me time to read it, yeah? Often you forgot you are not on your own. Keep in contact with yourself allows also to be in contact with the athletes and staff that can help you. Yeah, I think that's a very valid point because it has something to do with reciprocity. If you and your staff are both, let's say, on a level of awareness, let's say, related to the criteria that I have just mentioned here, then you can help each other to stay, let's say, alert. Because that's the case. Sometimes you think that you have something under control and you think you're going fine. And then, let's say, still on an unconscious level, pressure keeps in. Most of the times, I would say, in the cases of coaches, it's of an extensional nature. That means either your position as a coach or, let's say, your position in your organization or the performance of your team, where there's a lot at stake whether you win or lose. You know, I know that, let's say, in top soccer, that could mean a loss of millions when you don't participate in one of the international events. But on the other hand, on all the other sports in the world, it could very well mean that you lose and you go to the next bracket in the sport or the next level. So there's always a lot of stake because athletes give effort and you want to help them to have a good result. So the responsibility, there's also something at stake. Sarah writes, do you think, Hank, that some people are just natural at dealing with pressure, whereas some people have to work hard at it? Yes, of course. But in all cases, even if you are a natural, I would wholeheartedly advise even a natural person to bring this to, let's say, a conscious, competent level, because there's also the functionality of you passing on your knowledge to others, inspiring your team. So even if you are a natural, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are capable and competent of helping your staff to deal with performance under pressure. So that's actually what I mean. Nishan writes, so if I understand it correctly, I have to regain skills when they become unconscious skills? No, not at all. If you have internalized this, I would say, as the French say, knock on the door constantly. Toujours frapper. Be aware of what you're doing. Even if you get into your car, be aware of what you're doing. No, don't take things for granted. As soon as you take things for granted, you know, there are these laws in sport where they say if you meet a hurdle, you have to fasten up. You have to go faster. You have to run up a hill to go faster, to be average, in average form or higher on a higher level. So always awareness needs to be there. The fact that you talked about it, Nishan, might sound strange, but the fact that you mentioned it today already put it to a conscious level again. So don't think about it anymore. It's okay. You have mentioned it, and therefore you have thought about it. Sarah says, and maybe this is the last one if that's okay with all of you. So in time and constant practice away from the field, we will get better. Sure. Because where you put your attention, it will grow. Will you put it in the things that you can do? Or will you put it in the things like looking at yourself as a coach, feeling the privilege, and therefore being an inspiring person for all around you who you are going to help? Because you as a coach are not only responsible for your own behavior, but that of your staff, and then of course of those who are the athletes. Now, it's tempting. I see one more question here and I want to answer this because we still have a little bit of time. Practice makes our work under pressure more smooth. But tell me one thing that is staying under more pressure going to help. You know, I would say one thing. Maybe you have to accept under what kind of circumstances you work. And maybe you have to understand that your behavior is going to help you to have another relationship with your circumstances. Does that make sense? I truly hope so. Now, Vicky and dear guests, or must I say, dear guests and Vicky, thank you so much for being our guests today. I really appreciate that you have so much attention, and I truly hope that you will have a lot of success, be a balanced and successful and valuable coach for all your athletes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Henk. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I'm sure everybody else did. I know that you put an awful lot of work into that, along with Lizette from the Johan Cruyff for setting this all up. So, huge big thank you. It's a huge honour to have you present with the Female Coaching Network, and a big thank you to everyone for joining us all over the world, male and female coaches. I think that's such an important thing that we all work together. The recording will be available to everybody in the next few days, and I will email you the link to the recording if you want to go over that one more time. And as soon as I end the webinar, you will be asked just to give a couple of comments about how you found the webinar. So we would much appreciate if you could add a few comments into that. Other than that, Henk, if there's anything else you want to add, I think we're all done.
No, thank you. It was a privilege to be here and share some of our knowledge with you. Also, on behalf of the Johan Cruyff Institute, I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, everyone. Keep in touch.